Welcome to the nodding hour. Find a comfortable position, let your eyes grow heavy, and allow these quiet stories to carry you gently off to sleep. The watermill sits at a bend in the river, where the water slows slightly, before finding its way around the curve and continuing downstream. The building is old, stone walls darkened with years of weather and damp, the mortar between the stones soft and slightly mossy in the lower courses, where the ground moisture reaches, the upper walls drier and slightly paler. The wheel turns on the southern wall, its paddles dipping into the mill race one by one, and lifting clear of the water one by one. A slow and entirely regular rotation that has been going on in one form or another at this bend in this river for longer than anyone currently alive can clearly remember. It is dusk. The light is in its final half hour of being useful. The sky above the river valley, a pale gold at the western horizon, where the sun has just gone below the tree line, deepening to a soft orange pink above that, and then to a blue gray that deepens further overhead towards something that will be dark within the hour. The river catches this light and holds it on its surface in long broken reflections, the gold of the western sky duplicated in the moving water, shifting and reforming with each ripple, never the same twice, but always the same essential warmth of color. Inside the mill, the light is dimmer. The windows are small and the walls thick, and the interior has been in a kind of permanent, gentle dimness since it was built. The light that comes in through the small windows, warm and slightly amber in the afternoon, and fading now, to something softer and more gray as the evening comes so. The mill has not ground grain for many years. The machinery is still present. The great wooden gears and the millstone and the hoppers and the chutes, all of it in place, all of it still and dusty and very old looking. The working parts of a machine that no longer works, which gives the interior a particular quality that working mills do not have, a quality of preserved stillness, of a moment in time, held and maintained by the absence of the activity that gave it its original purpose. The floor is stone, worn smooth in the paths that feet took most often, from the door to the millstone, from the millstone to the hopper, back to the door. These paths are visible in the floor as slightly smoother channels in the general roughness of the stone, the record of thousands of the same journeys made by people long gone, their roots still present in the worn surface of the floor. A chair near the window, a simple wooden chair, its back slightly loose from age, its seat worn smooth in the center. Sitting in it, the window to the left showing the river and the wheel turning its slow and patient turn, the paddles dipping and lifting, the water running off each paddle as it clears the surface in a thin curtain of drops that catch the last of the evening light before falling back. The sound of the mill. This is its defining characteristic at this hour, the sound that fills the interior and gives it its particular atmosphere. The wheel itself makes a sound as it turns, a low and rhythmic creaking, the wood of it old and slightly soft, the bearings worn, each revolution marked by the same sequence of sounds in the same order, a sound that is completely regular and completely unhurried, the sound of something turning at the pace the water dictates and no other pace. Beneath this, the sound of the water itself, the mill race channeling the river's flow beneath the wheel, the sound of moving water in a confined space, a deeper and more continuous sound than the wheel's rhythm, a sound that underlies everything else and gives it its foundation. The two sounds together, the wheel's rhythm and the water's continuous voice, layered over each other in the dim interior of the old mill, filling the space completely without being loud, just present, just entirely filling the acoustic space of the room in the way that the sounds of working water always fill the spaces around them, not intrusively, but thoroughly, leaving no silence to be filled by anything else, which is deeply restful, which is the particular restfulness of being near running water in an enclosed space at the end of a day. The light through the window is changing as the dusk advances. The gold of the western sky visible through the glass is fading, the warmth going out of it, the pale gold becoming pale cream, becoming pale gray. the river below it still catching what remains of the color, but less brilliantly now. The reflections on the water less vivid, the water itself darker. The wheel continues its turning, indifferent to the light, dependent on the water, and not on anything else. The paddles still dipping and lifting in the same rhythm they have maintained all day, and will maintain until the water is diverted or the wheel is stopped, which it will not be tonight. The chair is solid beneath you, its wood cool and slightly rough, except where it is smooth. The particular roughness of old wood that has not been finished or refinished, that has just been used and weathered, and used again over many years. The mill floor cool underfoot through the soles of the shoes. Stone holds the cold of the river air all day, regardless of the warmth above it. The thermal mass of it working against warming, as it works against cooling. The floor always a few degrees cooler than the air, which at this hour and in this stone building is cool enough already. The particular cool of a building beside a river in the evening that has never been warm in the way that buildings away from water can be warm. A cobweb in the corner of the window frame, very fine, slightly dusty, its maker long gone, the web itself intact, and catching the last of the light in its threads, each thread visible as a line of faint silver where the light catches it. The whole web a small and intricate structure of lines and angles that is very beautiful. In the low light, very present for being so fine, very much itself in the corner of this old window in this old mill, beside this old river at the end of this particular evening. The wheel turns, the water runs, the light fades. The mill holds its stillness around the sounds of the water and the wheel, around the cool air and the worn floor, and the old machinery, and the cobweb in the window, around everything that it has held, for all the years of its standing, here at this bend, in this river, doing what it does, which is to be here, which is to hold this particular combination of water sound and stone and dim light and old wood in this particular arrangement, which is entirely its own and entirely sufficient. Nothing is required. The wheel will turn until the water stops turning it, which will not be tonight. The river will continue downstream to wherever it goes, which is its own business. The light will fade to dark, and the dark will hold this bend in the river, and the mill on its bank, and the wheel on the mill, and the water in the mill race, and the chair in the window, and the person in the chair, all of it held in the dark, and the sound of water until morning comes again slowly from the east, and the light returns to the river. The old machinery, the millstone, its surface rough and heavy, a great circular weight of stone that has ground many thousands of measures of grain in its working life and has been still for many years now, resting on its supporting structure, its weight entirely present and entirely patient. The most substantial thing in the room. The wooden gears above it, interlocking teeth of wood, worn smooth at their tips from the years of turning against each other. The gaps between them slightly wider than they were when new. The whole mechanism slightly looser than it was designed to be. The looseness of something that has done its work and been allowed to rest. Running a finger along one of the gear teeth, the wood smooth and very hard. The grain of it dense and close, the surface slightly oily still, from whatever lubrication was applied to it in its working years. The hoppers above the millstone, their wooden sides dark and slightly stained with the flour dust of many years of grain passing through them, the staining visible in the grain of the wood, as a pale dust that has worked its way into the surface and been held there. A record of the mill's working life in the fabric of the wood itself. The chutes that led the grain from the hoppers to the stone and the flour from the stone to whatever received it. Narrow wooden channels, their interiors smooth and slightly worn, the grain having polished them over years of passing through. The wood there smoother than anywhere else in the mill. The surface of something that has been used very thoroughly, for a very long time. The wheel outside the window, still turning, its rhythm unchanged. The water in the mill race, still providing its constant and reliable impetus. The wheel taking what the water offers and turning it into the slow rotation that drove everything in the mill when everything in the mill was running, which it is not. But the wheel does not know this or does not care. just continues, just turns, just does the thing it was built to do, with the water that has always been here to do it with. The light very nearly gone now, the window showing the river dark, and the sky above it dark blue. The wheel a darker shape against the river, its paddles just visible in the last of the light. Their slow rotation, the last moving thing visible in the evening. Then the light goes entirely, and the window shows only darkness and the sound of the wheel in the water, which continues exactly as before, which will continue through the night, which is very restful, which is the most restful sound in the world at the end of a day in a stone room beside a river. The dark in the mill is not complete darkness. The window shows the sky, which, even at its darkest, is slightly lighter than the interior of the mill. A deep blue-gray rectangle in the wall that provides just enough light to see the shapes of the machinery, the millstone, the gears, the hoppers, as darker shapes against the slightly lighter darkness of the window. The wheel outside is audible but no longer visible, its creak and its rhythm present in the air of the room as sound rather than sight. The wheel continuing its work entirely independently of whether it can be seen. The sound of the water in the dark. It is the same sound it was an hour ago when there was light. The same sound it will be an hour from now. The same sound it will be at 3 in the morning when there is nobody here to hear it. The water entirely indifferent to the presence or absence of listeners, just moving through the mill race in the dark as it has always moved, as it always will move, the sound of it filling the mill room with its continuous and entirely reliable presence. The coolness of the room, the stone walls giving their cold to the air very slowly, the temperature in the room settling toward something close to the temperature of the river outside, which is cold in the way that rivers are cold in the evening after a day that was not particularly warm. A clean and fresh cold that is not uncomfortable in a coat, but that the hands feel when they touch the stone of the wall. The stone cold and slightly damp in the lowest courses nearest the river. Sitting in the chair in the dark mill room with the sound of the water and the wheel and the river and the night settling over everything outside. The machinery in the dimness around you. The worn paths in the floor invisible now, but present underfoot. The smooth stone channels worn by feet long gone, just as present in the dark as in the light. The floor the same floor. The room the same room, just the light gone. Just the darkness instead of the dusk. The mill continuing to be what it is regardless. The river outside, visible now only as a movement in the darkness. The surface of it catching occasional faint light. From somewhere, from the stars perhaps, or from the last residual light in the western sky. Just enough to indicate that there is water there. Just enough to distinguish the river from the fields on its banks. The water darker than the sky above it and lighter than the land beside it. Just present in the night as the thing it has always been. The wheel, its sound very present in the quiet of the night, cleaner than it was in the evening when there were other sounds. Birds, the wind in the trees, the various small sounds of a valley at dusk, to layer over and around it. Now just the wheel and the water, just the creak and the run and the rhythm, and the continuous voice of the mill race. The two sounds of the mills working, filling the night air around the building, and filtering through the stone walls into the room within. Nothing required, nothing expected. The mill doing what it does, which is to stand and to let the water turn the wheel, and to be what it is at the bend in the river in the dark. Patient and entirely self-sufficient. The sound of it its own sufficient reason for being here. The water and the wheel and the stone and the dark, and the cool air and the worn floor. All of it together making something that is complete, and requires nothing added, that is the mill at night, which is this, which is the wheel turning in the dark, and the water running in the mill race, and the stone cool, and the floor worn, and the machinery still, and the night settled over everything, and the river continuing its long downstream journey in the dark. The chair, the stone floor, the dim window, the sound of water, the sound of the wheel, the cool air, the dark, everything at rest, everything continuing, everything exactly as it is, which is exactly as it has been and exactly as it will be. The mill at the bend in the river on this particular night, among all the particular nights it has stood here, holding its old machinery and its worn floor, and its sound of water in the dark, patient and still and entirely, peacefully, permanently here. The path along the riverbank runs behind the mill and northward along the western bank of the river. A narrow path through the long grass that grows between the path's edge and the bank, the grass wet with dew, already despite the early hour of the evening. The moisture coming off the river and settling on everything within reach of it. The bank here is low, just a foot or two above the water level in ordinary times. The grass at the bank's edge trailing its tips into the current where the bank is lowest. The river moving past these trailing stems without any apparent interest in them, just moving, just continuing downstream. The river at this hour. The light on it is the last of the evening light. The gold of the sunset, reduced now to a pale warm glow along the western horizon. The sky above the valley deepening toward the blue-gray of the approaching night. The river catching the remaining warmth of the sky in its surface and returning it in the slightly broken and mobile way that moving water returns reflections, never quite still enough for a perfect image, but always offering something, always showing some version of what is above it. The sound of the river changes as you move along the bank. Near the mill, it is the sound of the mill race, of water channeled and controlled, moving faster than the open river, the sound of it lower and more turbulent than the sound of the river proper. Moving northward away from the mill race rejoins the main channel, and the sound shifts, becomes broader, more open, the sound of a river moving through a shallow section, the water broken into small waves by the stones on the riverbed. A continuous and varied sound that is higher and more complex than the sound of deeper water, but still deeply calm. Still the sound of something that has been making this sound for a very long time. The path soft underfoot, the earth damp and slightly yielding, each footstep leaving a faint impression in the surface of the path that will still be there in the morning, filled with dew, tiny pools of standing water in the shapes of the souls that made them. The grass on either side brushing against the ankles as you walk, cold and wet, the dew on it leaving its small, cold traces on the fabric of the trousers. An entirely familiar and entirely seasonal sensation. The particular feeling of walking through long, wet grass in the evening that belongs to this time of year and no other. A bend in the river ahead, where the bank curves outward and the water slows in the deeper pool that forms on the outside of the bend. This is a very particular kind of river feature. The deep, slow pool at the outside of a curve. The water there darker than the shallow, fast water of the straight sections. The bottom invisible. The surface moving very slowly and with a slight rotary quality. The current describing a long, shallow spiral in the pool, before finding the main channel again at the pool's downstream end. Standing on the bank above this pool, looking down at the water, which is dark and very slow. The sky reflected in it with more precision than the faster sections allow. The pale gray blue of the upper sky, the warm band of the western horizon. The first stars, if any, are out yet, all of it present in the dark surface of the pool, with a clarity that the rest of the river rarely offers. A fish, the surface of the pool disturbed very briefly at its center, a ring expanding outward from a point, the surface broken for a moment and then restored, the ring spreading to the pool's edges and dissipating there against the bank, and the trailing grass and the still water at the margins. Then nothing. The pool still again, the reflection restored, the fish wherever it went, the pool exactly as it was, except for the slow fading of the ring, the last evidence of whatever happened at the surface. A small and brief and entirely sufficient event. The path continues northward, the river to the right, visible through the bank vegetation in places and hidden in others, always audible, its sound changing with the character of the riverbed beneath it, shallower here and louder, deeper there and quieter, the sound of it a continuous commentary on the geography of the riverbed that is entirely legible if you know how to read it, which requires nothing more than walking along a river for long enough to understand the relationship between what you hear And what is below the surface? The trees along the bank, mostly willows in the lower sections where the bank is wet enough for them, their roots in the bank, and their branches hanging over the water, their trailing ends touching the surface in some places, the current pulling at them very slightly, a gentle and entirely fruitless attempt by the river to take what the willow is not prepared to give. Further north, the willows give way to alders, their roots gripping the bank more firmly, their trunks leaning over the water at various angles, the bank having eroded beneath some of them over the years so that their roots are exposed above the waterline, dark and tangled and very present at the water's edge. The light continuing its fade, the warm glow in the western sky now very faint, just a memory of the sunset rather than the sunset itself, the sky above it fully blue-gray and darkening steadily, the river darker for it, the reflections in it cooler and less vivid, the water taking on the gray of the sky and becoming more itself, more river-colored, less sky-colored, the dark water of an evening river that carries its own color now that the sky has stopped lending it warmth. A heron on the far bank, standing at the water's edge in the shadow of an alder, absolutely motionless, its gray shape barely distinct from the gray of the bank behind it, visible only because of its particular stillness, which is different from the stillness of the bank, more intentional, more concentrated. The stillness of something waiting rather than the stillness of something simply being. It does not react to your presence on the far bank, or reacts only in some internal way that produces no visible movement, the heron continuing its vigil at the water's edge with complete and unhurried attention. Standing on the path, watching the heron on the far bank. The river between you, moving at its evening pace, its sound filling the space between you and the heron, the sound of the water entirely indifferent to the two still figures on opposite banks regarding each other, or not regarding each other across its moving surface. The heron does not move. You do not move. The river moves between you, as it always moves, making its sound, and reflecting its sky and carrying its dark water downstream. The heron moves eventually, not dramatically, just a slow extension of the neck, a slight adjustment of the feet, a repositioning that is so gradual it is almost imperceptible, the heron finding a slightly different angle on the water below it, its attention undiverted, its patience undiminished. Then still again. The repositioning complete, the vigil resumed, the river between you continuing its movement, the evening continuing its darkening, everything continuing as it was but slightly rearranged. Walking on, the path continuing northward, the mill behind you now, its wheel just audible in the distance, its sound reduced by the distance to something very faint and very rhythmic, a slow pulse in the general sound of the river valley that is identifiable if you listen for it and easily lost in the broader sound of the river if you don't. The mill sound fading as the distance increases, the river sound constant throughout, just changing its character with the changing riverbed. Shallow here, deep there, the sound varying, but always present. Always the sound of this particular river, on this particular evening. A gate in the bankside hedge. Old iron, its latch stiff and slightly rusted. The hinges squeaking very slightly as it opens. A sound that belongs entirely to old iron gates in old hedges at the edge of old fields. A sound that announces itself and then is absorbed by the evening air, leaving no trace. Through the gate, a meadow, a flat field of rough grass that runs down to the riverbank on the right and extends to a line of trees on the left. The grass long and slightly wet. The field very still in the fading light, crossing the meadow toward the river's edge. The grass tall enough to brush the hands at the sides. The seed heads of the grasses catching the last of the light in small pale points. The field a quiet and inhabited space, even in its apparent emptiness. Insects somewhere in the grass. The occasional small sound of something moving through the stems. The field alive in its own quiet way, with the life that long grass meadows contain. The bank at the far end of the meadow. Lower here than the path side, the field having sloped very gradually, down to the water's edge. The grass at the bank's edge trailing into the current. The river just below, very close. the sound of it immediate and present from this low position, the water level with the eye almost if you sit on the bank. The river very wide from this perspective, the far bank much further away than it seemed from the path. Sitting on the bank, the grass damp beneath, the earth soft, the river directly in front, the sound of it very present from this position. The water moving past at its evening pace, dark and unhurried. The sky above the far bank very large from here. The valley wide, the remaining light in the western sky just visible above the tree line on the far side, pale and fading. The day almost done, the river moving past. Always moving, always the same and always different. The water that is here now, not the water that was here a minute ago. The river continuous, but its contents always in transit, always on their way downstream, always being replaced by what is upstream. The river a process rather than a thing, a continuous movement that presents itself as a thing, that has a name and a character, and a sound that are entirely its own and entirely consistent, even as the water itself is never the same water twice. Nothing required from the bank, just sitting. Just the river and the sky, and the fading light, and the sound of the water, and the damp grass, and the cool air of the river valley at evening. All of it present and sufficient, and entirely at rest. The light in the western sky finally gone. The sky above the valley now uniformly dark. The stars appearing one by one as the darkness deepens. The first ones visible while the sky was still blue-gray. The fainter ones appearing as the blue-gray deepened toward black. The sky delivering its stars slowly and without announcement, each one simply present, where it was not a moment before. The river below the sky taking the starlight into its surface in small and broken points. The moving water unable to hold the reflection steadily, just catching it briefly and releasing it. The stars in the river a scattered and mobile version of the stars above. The sound of the river in the full dark. The same sound it has been all evening, but more present now. More the dominant fact of the environment. The other sounds of the valley having quieted as the evening advanced. The birds settled. The insects less active. The general background sound of a valley in daylight, reduced to just this. Just the river and its continuous movement over its stones, and through its deep pools and around its curves. Just the sound that the river makes when everything else is quiet, which is the truest sound of this valley. Walking back, the meadow in the dark, the grass invisible below the knees. Just the sensation of it brushing and the sound of it. The path to the gate found more by feel than by sight. The gate found by the hedge found by the sound of the field, giving way to something denser and more vegetated. The latch stiff in the dark as it was in the light. The gate opening, the path back toward the mill, southward now. The river to the left. The mill just visible ahead after a few minutes of walking. A dark shape against the slightly lighter darkness of the sky. Its stone walls just present as a mass rather than as a building, with individual features. The wheel audible before the mill is properly visible. The creak and rhythm of it carrying clearly in the night air, the same rhythm it has had all evening. The same sound, the wheel turning in the dark above the mill race as it turns in the light, making no distinction between the two. The mill door, inside. The room darker than outside. The window showing the slightly lighter sky, but the interior of the mill, dark except for that. The machinery in the dimness. The worn paths in the floor invisible. Everything present as fact rather than as sight. The room known rather than seen. The chair, sitting again. The sound of the wheel and the water, the same in the dark as in the light. The room around the sounds, the same room. The cool air, the stone floor, the old machinery patient in the dark. Everything continuing, everything still, everything exactly as it was and as it will be. The river outside the mill wall, running past in the dark, its sound reaching the room through the stone as it always has, as it always will. The river patient and continuous and entirely indifferent to the dark or the light or the turning wheel, or the people who have sat in this room over the years listening to it. Just the river, just the wheel, just the water and the stone and the dark and the cool air, and the sound of everything continuing in its own way, in its own time, with no reference to anything that is not the river, and the mill, and the bend, and the bank, and the water that has always been here, sitting in the dark mill room, the wheel turning, the water running, the stars above the valley doing their own slow work. The night settled over everything, and likely to remain settled until morning, when the light will return from the east, and the valley will become visible again, and the wheel will still be turning, and the water will still be running, and the mill will still be here at the bend in the river, exactly as it is now, exactly as it has always been. Nothing required, nothing expected, just this, just the wheel and the water, and the dark, and the cool air, and the worn floor, and the old machinery, and the river going past in the night. Just the sound of everything continuing. Just this quiet and sufficient and entirely peaceful now. The mill keeper's room is on the upper floor of the mill, reached by a narrow staircase whose treads are worn in the center, from years of the same feet making the same ascent. The room is small, just large enough for a bed against one wall, a table and chair beneath the window, a small fireplace in the corner with a chair beside it, a shelf of a few things above the fireplace. The ceiling is low, the beams of it the same dark oak as the beams in the mill room below, the plaster between them slightly uneven and slightly yellowed. The walls of the room the same stone as the walls of the mill, thick and cool to the touch, and holding the cold of the river air regardless of the fire. The fire is lit, a small fire in the small fireplace, the kind of fire that is adequate to a room this size and no more. A fire that knows its purpose, which is to warm this particular room to a comfortable temperature and maintain it there, not to impress anyone, not to be dramatic, just to burn steadily and give its heat to the stone walls, and the air, and the person in the chair beside it. Two logs on a bed of coals, the flames above them modest and steady, the coals below them deep orange, the heat from the whole arrangement sufficient and present and very welcome in the stone room above the river. The sound of the river from up here, different from the sound of the river at bank level, filtered by the stone walls and the floor of the room below, arriving here as something slightly muffled and slightly more continuous than it is close up. The individual sounds of the water smoothed by the intervening stone into something more even and more constant, more like a general presence than a specific sound. The river as background rather than the river as foreground. And beneath this, always the wheel, its creak and rhythm arriving through the walls and the floor as a very faint and very regular pulse, the mill's heartbeat, present in the room at all times as a vibration more felt than heard. The chair beside the fire, old, its wood dark with age, its seat cushion thin and slightly flattened, a cushion that was made for this chair, and has been on this chair for many years, and is now entirely shaped to the person who has sat in it most. Or rather, is shaped to the general impression of sitting, to the weight and warmth of a human body in this chair, beside this fire, which is what you are now, adding your particular weight to the accumulated weight of everyone who has sat here before. The window above the table shows the river and the valley beyond it. Dark now, the last of the evening light entirely gone. The sky above the valley a deep blue-gray that will be black within the hour. The river below it invisible, except as a slightly different darkness than the fields on its banks. A darkness that moves very slightly if you watch it. The surface of the water catching occasional faint light from somewhere and releasing it again. The river present in the dark as an absence of the stillness that surrounds it. A candle on the table, lit, its flame small and steady. In the still air of the room, the flame perfectly vertical. The wax below it melted into a small pool that catches the light and holds it. The shadow of the candle thrown across the table in a long soft line by the fire behind you. The candle and the fire together make the light of the room, warm and amber and slightly orange, the particular light of flame that has no equivalent in any other kind of light, that makes everything it illuminates look warm and present and slightly golden. The shelf above the fireplace, a few objects on it, a small clock whose tick is just audible above the sound of the fire in the river, a slow and steady tick that marks the seconds without urgency, that has been marking them in this room for however long. The clock has been here, indifferent to who was listening. A ceramic jug, plain and slightly rough, its glaze a warm cream color. Its purpose unclear now, just present, just part of the room. A small framed thing, a photograph or a drawing, difficult to make out in this light, propped against the wall between the jug and the clock, its subject indistinct, just a small dark rectangle in a frame. The fire settles, a log shifting slightly, the coals beneath it rearranging, the flames adjusting, the heat from it reaching across the small room, to the chair and the person in it, steady and sufficient. The warmth of a small fire in a small stone room that has been warming for an hour already, and is now at its working temperature, the walls having absorbed enough heat to begin contributing their own, the room warm in the layered way of rooms that have been heated for some time. The river below, the wheel on the wall of the mill below this room, turning its slow and patient turn in the dark outside. The water running through the mill race in the dark, the sound of it arriving through the stone floor, and the stone walls as that faint and continuous presence that underlies everything in this room, that has underlain everything in this room. For however many nights the mill has been here, and whoever has been in this room above it. The candle flame, very still. No draught in the room to move it. The flame burning straight and clean. Its light steady on the table, and the wall, and the ceiling above it. The wax pool around its base, glowing very faintly. The light in the liquid wax, catching and moving slightly, with the convection of the flame above it. Very small and very gentle movement, and the otherwise completely still surface of the melted wax. The clock on the shelf ticks. The fire breathes. The river runs. The wheel turns in the dark outside. The room is warm and still and dim, and the candle burns its steady flame, and the fire burns its steady fire, and the river runs its steady run, and the wheel turns its steady turn, and everything in this small stone room above the old mill at the bend in the river is warm and quiet and at rest and entirely, completely, wholly sufficient. The fire lower now than it was, the logs having burned through their first hour into something quieter and more settled, the flames smaller, the coals deeper and more orange, the heat, if anything more, even and more thorough than before. The stone walls now fully warm and contributing their stored heat to the room in a way that means the room will stay warm long after the fire itself has gone to embers and then to ash. The candle, still burning, its flame still straight and clean, the wax lower than it was, the pool wider, the candle shorter by whatever amount an hour of burning takes from a candle of this size, which is not much, which is just enough to be visible if you compare now to an hour ago, which you don't, which is not necessary, which is entirely beside the point of the candle, which is just to burn and to give its light to the room, and to continue doing so for as long as it has wax to burn. The chair, the fire, the candle, the clock, the river below, the wheel turning in the dark, the room warm and dim and quiet, the stone walls warm, the ceiling low, the window dark, the shelf with its small objects, the bed against the far wall with its dark cover, waiting, entirely patient, entirely ready, the body in the chair. Having been here for some time now, having settled into the cushion and the warmth and the sounds of the room in the way that bodies settle into warm rooms after long evenings, completely, without reservation, every part of it having found its accommodation, with the chair and the temperature and the hour. The particular heaviness that is not tiredness exactly, but is the body's honest acknowledgement of where it is in the day. Straightforward and entirely reasonable requests for what comes next, which is rest, which is the bed against the far wall, which is the long and dark and quiet and entirely sufficient night. The clock marks its slow and steady seconds. The candle holds its small flame. The fire breathes its quiet breath in the grate. The river runs below, and the wheel turns outside, and the night holds everything in its dark and patient way. The valley quiet around the mill, the river quiet in its banks, the stars above the valley quiet in the sky, everything settled into the deep and reliable quiet of a night that has fully arrived and will last until morning. The warmth of the room very present, the sounds of the mill and the river very present, the candle and the fire giving their light to everything in the room, warm and amber and entirely adequate, making the small stone room above the old mill exactly what it is, which is warm and quiet and dim and entirely its own, which is this room and no other room, which is the mill keeper's room above the mill, at the bend in the river on this particular night. Nothing is required. The fire will burn for another hour before it needs attention, which it will not get, which does not matter, which will just mean the room will cool very gradually after that, which is fine, which is the natural conclusion of an evening fire in a stone room, which requires no intervention and no concern, which is just what happens. The candle burns, the clock ticks, the river runs, the wheel turns, the room is warm. Everything continues in its own way, at its own pace, with no reference to anything outside itself, which is the way of rooms like this, and rivers like this, and nights like this, patient and self-sufficient and entirely adequate to themselves. The chair holds you, the room holds the chair, the mill holds the room, the river holds the mill in its sound and its presence and its cold and its patient, continuous flowing. The night holds all of it, the mill and the river, and the room, and the fire, and the candle, and the clock, and the wheel, turning in the dark outside, and the bed against the far wall, and the shelf with its jug, and its clock, and its small frame thing, and the person in the chair beside the fire. All of it held by the night in its dark and patient way, as the night always holds everything, which is gently, which is completely, which is without any particular effort or intention, which is simply the nature of the night. The fire very low now, the logs mostly ash, the coals beneath them very deep orange and very steady, no longer varying much in their brightness, just glowing at their level and maintaining it. The heat they give very even and very reliable. The last reliable warmth the fire will give before it goes entirely, which will be sometime in the night, which will be after sleep has come, which will be noticed only in the morning when the grate is cold ash, and the room has cooled to the temperature of the stone. The candle still burning, its flame still straight and small and clean. The wax considerably lower than it was when the evening began. The candle now perhaps half its original height. The pool of wax around the flame wider and more established. The light it gives exactly the same as it has always given, unchanged by the reduction in its size. Just as warm, just as amber, just as steady in the still air of the room. The clock ticking. The same tick it has always had. The same interval, the same small sound in the quiet room, marking the seconds without urgency or comment. Doing what clocks do, which is to measure the passage of time in the most regular and reliable way available, which is tick by tick, second by second, minute by minute. The clock entirely indifferent to what the time is or what happens in the room between its ticks. Just marking, just continuing. The river below, the wheel outside. Both sounds arriving in the room as they have arrived all evening, through the stone and the floor, as vibration and as sound, as the background against which everything else in the room takes place. The river will be running when the fire is ash. The wheel will be turning when the candle is out. Both of them entirely independent of the room and its contents and its fire and its candle and its person in the chair, just continuing in their own way with their own water and their own wood and their own long-established rhythms. The heaviness in the eyes, very present now, very specific, and very honest. The body having made its assessment of where it is in the evening and arrived at a clear conclusion, which is that the bed against the far wall is the appropriate next destination, which is that the chair beside the fire has given what it had to give this evening, which is that The candle will burn without requiring observation, and the clock will tick without requiring listening, and the fire will cool without requiring attention, and the river will run, and the wheel will turn, and all of it will continue exactly as it has continued all evening and all day, and all the days and evenings before this one, entirely self sufficient, entirely independent, entirely and completely fine. The bed against the far wall, its dark cover, smooth and slightly cool to the touch, the pillow cool on the face, the blanket heavy and warm, the mattress receiving you with the same patient accommodation that the chair received you, giving at the right places, firm at the right places, entirely adequate. The room warm still from the evening's fire, the stone walls holding what they have absorbed, the air still carrying the warmth that the fire gave it, the room at rest around the bed, the candle still burning on the table, the fire still glowing in the grate, the clock still ticking on the shelf, the river below, the wheel outside, their sounds arriving through the stone floor and the stone walls as they have arrived all evening, as they will arrive all night, the mill's continuous and entirely reliable night music, the sound that this room has always had and will continue to have, the sound of water and wheel and stone and night. The eyes close, the breath slows, the candle burns its small flame on the table, the fire breathes its last warm breath in the grate. The clock ticks its soft tick on the shelf. The river runs below, and the wheel turns outside, and the night holds the mill, and the valley and the river, and the room, and everything in the room, in its dark and patient and entirely sufficient way. And there is nothing left to do, and nowhere left to be. And the room is warm, and the night is quiet, and the wheel turns in the dark, and the water runs in the mill race, and the river goes on its long way downstream, in the dark, and everything is still, and warm, and quiet, and at rest, and the night continues its deep, and gentle, and entirely peaceful work of passing until morning. That's all for tonight at the Nodding Hour. If these stories helped you rest, subscribe so you never miss a new one. Sleep well. We'll see you next time.